are His representative on earth, and what He has given to us is on loan while we're here. Now, we're free to make our own decisions as to how we're going to use what He's placed in our hands. But we also need to remember that we're going to give an account someday for the choices we made as to how we used what He gave us. In other words, to put it plainly, a steward receives delegated authority. It's a real authority, but it's a secondary authority, God being the final authority. Personal ownership is secondary to God's final ownership. I mean, when I say what God has given to us on earth, I mean your children, your home, all of your possessions, your parents. They're all what? On loan from God. And since God is the ultimate owner of all that is, and since He has placed in my hand all that I have, and since I am to be a faithful steward of all He has given me, it becomes obvious that I have some questions that I have to ask constantly in my life. And so do you. Is this how God would have me use what He has given me? Is this something that God would want me to do, or to buy, or to invest in? I mean, how many people have taken what God has given them and invested it in bars, in drugs, in pornography, in alcohol? I mean, are you going to tell me that it's okay for you to take what God has given you and invest it in that kind of junk? So we have some very important questions to ask in our life. How am I using what God has given me? The Bible is clear that, listen, we are to make Jesus Christ Lord of all that we say and all that we do, and how we use what He has given to us, what we invest in, the quality of work that we do as an employee, the attitude with which we do it, the motivation behind what we do, and how much we give to the spread of the gospel, and then why we do that. It's all given to us by God with expectations. And so God says what He's given to us is on loan. Now, since God has given us all that we have and has done so freely and cheerfully, He in turn wants you and I to learn to become cheerful givers. Now, when we go out and make basic use of what He's given to us, it always involves things like this: care for our family. Obviously, God wants us to care for our family. Secondly, helping the needy. He that turns a deaf ear to the poor, we saw last time, is not going to be blessed by God. And also giving to God's work. If you want an interesting chapter, make a little note and read 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 4 to 18. And if you can't find it there, look around until you find it. There's a great section there on giving. I just had a moment there where I said I might have written that down wrong, but here's my point. We're using the worship service today as our role model for daily living. So what we do in this place on Sunday morning, we need to be doing all week. So let's talk then about the subject for today. Worship through giving. Worship ascribes ultimate worth to who? Yeah, worship comes out of worthship. That God has ultimate worth in our life. We value Him. We value His Word and His will far above all created things. Understanding that, and understanding that we are simply stewards of God's gifts, frees us to become cheerful givers to God and to others. And that, of course, is where God makes a remarkable promise to us. He says in Luke 6:38, we read it for our text, "Give and it will be given to you." Now, every person in that day knew what that meant. Probably every farmer, except this one. I've been a farmer all my life, but I've never farmed. But you know what I'm saying? The people that are out there on the farm know what Jesus is talking about here. It wasn't uncommon to go to the feed store or to the market or to this guy's farm or that guy's farm and fill up a bag with grain or with different things that they handled in their farm, and then put it on the wagon and drive home. And get home, you'd have a half a bucket full. Like the cereals say today, contents may settle with travel or something like that. But look what Jesus says. "Given it will be given unto you, a good measure." First of all, it's going to be a good measure. Pressed down. When I put this in the bag, I'm going to push it down, shake it together. We'll pick up the bag and pound it down, and running over, where it'll be pouring it. That's just a farmer's way of saying, I'm going to give to you so generously it will astound you. But the condition is this: you have to be a giver. In other words, it is as we give that we receive. Paul likened it in his writings unto sowing seed, and he applied the well-known laws of the harvest. I remember the story about a Scotsman. Now this may be apocryphal, but I heard it as a true story. There was a Scotsman that had the gift of giving. That's really, what do they call that, an oxymoron? But there was a Scotsman that had a gift of giving, and God just kept blessing his business and blessing his business. And the more he blessed, the more he gave away. And the more he gave away, the more he got blessed. And so finally somebody came to him, says, I've been watching you. He says, it seems like you give away so much, and yet you always have more than you need. Now, I can't do a Scottish accent, so I'll just tell you what he said. He said, "It's very simple, lad." He says, "I shovel it out, and God shovels it in, and God has a bigger shovel." And really, that's it, isn't it? 2 Corinthians 8:6 says this, "Remember this, who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously." And Paul goes on to say to the generous giver, "And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." I don't know how much plainer they can say it than that. That if you want to be blessed, you first must be a blessing. God delights to bless his children. We're not supposed to give so that we will get. I'll never forget one time I was pastoring Grand Avenue, Trinity Baptist Church in Stockton, and we were just in the process of outgrowing our auditorium. And if you think this pew is close, it was just about down here to where they were practically sitting on my lap, putting in chairs. I loved that moment in my life. But sitting on the front row, the first two seats here, were two guys, and I'll never forget what he said as the offering plate was passed. He said, "I'm going to give $10, so I'll get 100. He'd been listening to oral. A lot of people suffer from oral decay. We're not supposed to give so that we will get. God is not your lottery machine saying you put so many nickels in the slot and I'll pay off. He says, "I want to bless you. And here's the promise I make you. If you give, it will be given unto you." That's hard to translate sometimes, isn't it? Into our daily life. God promises to bless the generous giver. Having said